Hello, this is JJ DiGeronimo with Together We Seek Online. And today I have an amazing practitioner, Sarah Steele, who does not live that far from me. I actually was reading a book about the hypnosis and a journey to Atlantis, which got me on the path of QHHT. The author of that book actually lives in Florida, and I was looking for local practitioners here in Ohio, and I found Sarah. And Sarah and I started a conversation, and I could not get enough. I'm like, I need to know more. I need to know more. And that's how I brought her here with all of us today. So, Sarah, thank you for joining us. And I would love to just kick right into what is QHHT?
Well, thank you for having me, JJ. I'm so excited to talk to you about this today. But QHHT is a form of past life regression developed by Dolores Cannon over the course of her career. She found through her hypnosis clients that she was originally just doing the normal behavior modification, the stop smoking and the weight loss, but she found that her clients were going a bit deeper into their experiences and tapping into previous lifetimes. And so she just was, kind of dug deeper into that. And through the course of her career, she met different people whom were able to channel different people like Nostradamus. She was finding people having different lifetimes in Atlantis. So it's really interesting. It can go all over the place.
Wow. You know what I love about that? I love that she's just doing her work and continuing to be curious.
Yes. And one of the things that she always stresses to us is just be an incessant questioner. To be curious is really one of the best qualities you can have, I guess, as a hypnosis practitioner, just wanting to know more and being curious about that.
Well, I'm curious. So, most people don't wake up one morning and be like, you know what, I'm going to study QHHT. So, how did this happen for you?
So it's kind of twofold. I've got an earlier life story and then kind of a later life story. I was the oldest of four kids, and being the oldest daughter, you generally tend to take care of your younger siblings quite a bit. And my younger two were quite a bit younger than I am. So my sister was about 3 at the time. I might have been like 14. And I'm watching them one day and she just starts crying. And it was a cry I had never heard her cry before. There was something very different about it. She was sitting in the chair. None of my brothers had touched her. Like nothing had happened. So I'm like, Hannah, what's going on? And she starts telling me about how she has a baby in her belly and they were driving in a car and the car went off the side of a cliff and like caught on fire and they died. And I'm like, she's 3. There's absolutely no way that you know anything about any of that. So it was kind of one of those, kids that the veil for them is very thin. So they kind of remember these things a lot more than we tend to later in life. And so that kind of kickstarted my interest in reincarnation, past life regression. I was just reading as much as I could on like near-death experiences, anything on the topic. And then life happened. I grew up. I had my own kids. I was a hairdresser and did kind of that cosmetology route for a long time. And just through, kind of my own life experiences, the death of my father, life just happens, But I had hit a low point, and kind of that low point's the jumping off point for your spiritual awakening that happens then. And I just leveled with spirit, like, look, I need you to tell me what you want me to do. I was searching for that life purpose that so many of us are. And they were like, well, how about this? And I was like, that's a thing you can do, for other people. It kind of reignited that curiosity I had about past life regression and reincarnation and stuff like that. And then I just was like, I got to learn everything that I can about it. And that was in 2016 and we've just been doing it ever since.
That's pretty fantastic. It's funny because as I mentioned, I'm writing my third book and I feel like you get glimpses in your life at different stages that don't really make sense to you. But when you get on your path, it's more evident of why that happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You do get little hints and signs along the way.
Yeah. So like the fact that your sister said that so early on.
And she doesn't remember it. If you would ask her, she obviously has no memory of that happening. But I mean, you can read there are Twitter threads and on Reddit, there are so many instances where kids say what some people think is kind of creepy, like, oh, about either seeing a spirit or remembering a past life. There's a lot of evidence out there of the things that kids are able to discern in their.
Yeah, my son has said to me before, I knew you before I got here.
Yes.
He's like, I knew you before I got here, Mom. It's just
Oh,
funny. And my daughter had said to me before, when she was kind of getting older, like 3, 4, she would tell me, I don't remember what God looks like. I can't remember him anymore. So she would say things like that. If you're paying attention, hear things that they say that don't really make sense, but makes me, for us to see that there might be something else that they're connected to or at least remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're still so open to it. They haven't learned to shut that down. They haven't been told, oh, we don't say things like that, or, kids are just so open to that stuff. So we kind of get a little bit older. We try to rationalize our experiences sometimes. And so, but they're completely open to it. They don't, I guess have the ego enough yet to be like, well, I'm just making that up.
Right. That makes sense. So in 2016, when you were presented this material, did you have a lot of starts and stops, or was it pretty fluid? Once it fell in your lap, you just sort of started moving forward with it?
No, a lot of starts and stops. So, they were like, hey, how about this? And I said, okay, so I started with the basics, like what even is hypnosis? Is what I wanted to understand, the fundamental of that and how that even operates. So there were a lot of things I had to handle in my personal life. Like I went through a breakup. We had to move. I was first had to address the spiritual issues that I had. So what a better way to practice the techniques than to really like work with your own stuff that you need to heal. So there were a lot of starts and stops along the way. I worked other jobs. I kind of forgot the goal for a little bit, and they would always kind of nudge me back to it, And it wasn't until coronavirus happened, I was working another job. I was quite content with what I was doing. I was at a wax salon, and so I was doing body waxing and things like that. And they're kind of like, hey, do you remember that? And I'm like, yeah, I'm getting to it. That wasn't enough for them. They were like, no. So once the shutdowns happened, I kind of had lost my job, and I was presented with all of this time and space and money to just, okay, now we do have to focus on it. And I was very aware. I'd watched a lot of Dolores's videos on YouTube. I had not read any of her books yet. I can't say that I am deep into the Dolores Cannon lore. I do know about some of the things, the Convoluted Universe books, and I've read her Life Between Death and stuff like that. But they just kind of keep pushing me along the path. Anytime I'm all like, oh, I get self-conscious or have any kind of doubt, they're like, no, we told you, you said. And I'm like, oh, you're right.
That's amazing. And I think that's such an important point, because I think so many people don't trust it, don't often validate it, or even feel comfortable with it. So there are a lot of starts and stops. And I think that's reassuring to so many people, because I think they often think like, well, when you're in it, and it's just going to all just unfold. But really it unfolds. And for many of us, like a rose, like one petal at a time.
Mm-hmm. You're so right about that. And it's still in a process of unfolding. As I was taking the course and doing my practice sessions, I do daily walks kind of through my neighborhood, and then I see, an office space for rent on my path. And I'm like, is that what I'm supposed to do? And I always liken it to the Indiana Jones movie, the Holy Grail, the Pilgrim's Path kind of thing that he has to do. You can't see it, but you just got to take that step and kind of trust that it's there. And that's kind of how it goes. I don't know what the next step looks like for me either, but when I see it, I'll know it. So that's enough.
I love that. I just pulled my pendulum out this weekend. I bought it, I think, in 2018, and I really haven't used it that much, but I was kind of in a pickle where I was trying to figure out what I'm doing with this book. And I just pulled the pendulum out, and it's like just asking it what's yes, what's no. And sometimes you just need like a little clarity.
You do. And there's so many different ways to get that clarity. Some people pull their pendulum. You talked about the body testing, which is one that I really like because our subconscious mind is looking to communicate to us through any means that will listen. So it can look any different way. There's not one right way for anybody. So I think that the past life regression can be for those that are curious and want to have the experience themselves. I recently was at a psychic fair and I don't sell anything. I just kind of had a booth there to network and meet people and just get out in the community. I'm in my office right now and you see I spend most of my time like in my office one-on-one with clients, which I love, but it was good to get out in the community a little bit. But there's a lot of psychics and tarot readers and astrologers there. But this can be interesting for those that want to have the experience themselves. And it can be really empowering to find your own answers. So I think that there's something to be said for that. Those that are brave enough to. Again, she had talked about shamanism, and I think that hypnosis and past life regression can be very similar to shamanism, only instead of doing it on their behalf, you're kind of guiding them through their own experience, which is really empowering for people, especially when they need to learn to trust their own inner voice.
I love that. And I know people drive hours and hours to see you. So tell us a little bit about what it is. So what is the experience?
It can be kind of a marathon. 5 to 6 hours I'm spending with you. It's kind of an all-day affair. I usually have a welcome email. I'll send you different ways to prepare, guided meditations, different tips and things to get the most out of your session that day. I'll have you prepare a list of questions. What are the core things that you want to understand? Either, the $1 million question, as Dolores calls it, is what is my purpose? In Western society, we tend to think of purpose as related to a career. And sometimes that's true. When I was seeking my purpose, I guess that's what I was asking. Like, what job do you want me to do that I can fulfill some role in humanity? But not always. I'm finding more and more that I'm getting really powerful light workers that need to understand that the need to be productive is nice, but you have to understand that just maintaining a high vibration and being a light and sharing love, it almost seems too simple, so they need to be reminded of that. You'll cover your list of questions. You'll come in. We'll sit and talk for a couple hours. I really want to know all about you. I want to hear your life story, everything that's brought you up to this point in time of us meeting. You'll come in and we'll talk about the patterns that you've experienced in your life that you'd like to address. Any physical healing can take place during the session. I had one recently. This woman had kind of torn a ligament in her ankle. And so we were able to kind of get some physical healing from there. But we'll sit and spend a couple hours talking to each other. I will take you through a number of visualization exercises. I really try to get people warmed up and comfortable with the process, because sometimes there's a little bit of performance anxiety, like, can I actually do it? People wonder, can I even be hypnotized? So I really try to do some exercises with them to get them comfortable with understanding how they're going to receive information. Not everyone is a visualizer. They can't see things in their head, but you get a knowing. What's the first idea that comes to mind when I ask you that question? And we start to see how they are, you posted a thing recently. How do you receive information? There's clairaudient, claircognizant, clairsentient. So, and that's kind of the same thing. When we talk about your inner wisdom, sometimes it's your inner voice. I'm clairaudient. I hear things, so it's an inner voice for me. For people who, are more somatic, it's that gut feeling. It's a tingling in their body somewhere. So it can be different for everyone, but I want to make sure that you're comfortable with how you're going to receive information. Get the subconscious mind warmed up. We'll do a few memory exercises. The session itself can take anywhere from an hour and a half if you're really cooking through things and moving fast and you maybe don't have a whole lot of questions. 3 hours is about the maximum amount of time. I would want to keep anyone in that state. Your body gets real stiff. It's been laying there for a while. And even though I'll kind of take you through a number of guided relaxation and physical healing, it does get it's a high energy state. a lot happens during that. So even just to process the amount of stuff that's happened during a 3-hour session can be a lot. So that's usually the maximum. Afterwards, we'll debrief, talk about the experience you had. Sometimes the higher self will give you homework, things that it wants you to do and, to follow up on the advice or the insight that it's given you. So we'll kind of go over that. I'll make sure that you're firmly back here before I send you on your way. I usually got a bottle of water and a snack.
That's amazing. It's amazing. I think that journey with yourself, like you said, first, most people don't spend that much time with themselves, even at this physical state, let alone any other journeys the soul may have taken. So does it take one session? Do people usually come back? How does that work?
It just depends. Some people have a lot of trauma that they need to work through, which really I like that to be my focus. Curiosity is okay. It's not ideal. It's not enough generally to just be like, oh, I wonder what my past lives were. If you're going to do something like this, we're wanting to work through some kind of issue, or really there's some deeper insight that needs to happen. So curiosity is okay, but if you're called to do a session, I think that even if you think you are just curious about what is my past life, or what have I had past lives, there's something deeper. And if you're honest with yourself and you dig a little bit, you'll come to that.
So say your soul had an experience a lifetime or 100 lifetimes ago, whatever it may be. If there's things that are happening either in your childhood, maybe your first relationship, maybe you're getting older, you feel like the soul kind of is showing up in different ways that maybe people come to you with odd things that don't really know how they make sense? Or do they generally come to you with something that's happened this lifetime that's very defined, which then has a tail in other arenas?
Yeah, sometimes they will have something we don't always go into a past life. Sometimes we go just into, if they've got a lot of things going on in this life, we'll go earlier into this life, an age regression, we would call that, instead of a past life regression. So we'll work through whatever they have to there. But you will find that there are parallels, and there's a lot of case studies out. Migraine headaches, you see there's often a correlation between some kind of severe head trauma in a death scenario in a previous lifetime. There's a case study. This isn't one of my sessions, but a woman came to Irene Hickman and she was deathly allergic to cats, but she loved cats and wanted to have a cat so bad. And so, in the past life regression process, she took her back to a lifetime when she was a small girl, kind of on a rural farm, and they had barn cats, and the barn cat had kittens. And she wanted to play with them, but the mom's like, look, it's a feral cat, don't do it unless I'm out there with you. Well, the little girl got curious, as little girls will, and she ended up being kind of mauled by the cat. And so the subconscious mind, in order to protect you, sometimes overcorrects. So now in this lifetime, she found herself extremely allergic, to kind of prevent her from ever having that scenario happen again. But by going back to that moment, seeing the original, trauma that happened, putting it into context, understanding it, being able to call that energy back. Because sometimes and we use the word trauma and we think it's got to be like the big bad three, SA, DV, different things like that. But really it's anything that causes you to kind of dissociate and you lose a little bit of yourself, a little bit of your energy. So when we're able to call the energy back through this process, you can find physical healing and remission of these problems. Now, there's the issue of karma too. Sometimes it's part of your life plan to have a certain problem, and in which case, even if we contact the higher self in earnest and they're just like, you agreed to this is what you wanted to learn. So not everything can be solved through this process, but at least you can understand that, okay, this is a part of my soul's evolution. I agreed to do this when I came here, and it can give you more peace, at least in that way.
So would you say that QHHT is a way to call your energy back that maybe you've left bits and pieces in different areas, whether it's at different ages or different lifetimes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the biggest benefits of it is being able to call that energy, those bits of your soul that are lost during those, traumas and things like that. So being able to call your energy back in that way is helping to raise your personal vibration, understand your soul's kind of evolution that it's on. And
That's a beautiful thing. Sarah, if somebody's listening to this now or in the future, how do they find you?
I'm located in Huron, Ohio. I have a physical office. I do also, now QHHT is per Dolores's requirements in person only. But I'm also certified in Beyond Quantum Healing, which is kind of an offshoot of QHHT by Candace Crawford Goldman, who worked with Dolores. There was a little bit of a divergence on some of the things, their ideas, but because I'm certified in BQH as well, we can do sessions online. And I find that online sessions can be just as deep, just as profound. I had a woman recently, she was going to come up from Kentucky, but she wasn't able to. So I was like, well, that's okay. We can just do it online. And she still had an amazing experience. And afterwards, she tells me, she's like, actually, I think I preferred the online a little bit better. She's used to listening to different guided meditations in her headphones at night when she goes to sleep. She's like, I think I would have been kind of nervous if you're just sitting there staring over me, laying in a bed. There can be that factor. Some people want to be in person and be in your energy, and I love it. That's beautiful. It's whatever works for you individually.
I'll put your handle and your website in the contact information for sure.
Yeah, I'm still working on the whole website thing. So, I'm Soul Journey Hypnosis on either Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. I'm trying to do more session clips, just little bits and pieces of sessions that I've had. I put them on YouTube or TikTok. So
I love that. That sounds amazing. That sounds amazing. So I'm going to open it for questions right now.
I was going to say when my daughter was 4, when you guys were talking about that earlier, we were driving in the car like really early in the morning and she was like, where was I before I was in your belly? And I was just like, that's such a weird question from a kid, She didn't want to know where she came from. She wanted to know where her soul was before it was in her body.
Yeah, that's so amazing. Isn't that so cool? Like, I love the way that little kids' minds work like that. And, we have taken people back to that point in between lives before in the planning stage. They've been able to see the thought process. Why did I choose the parents that I chose? Have I had past lives with them before? Has there been a role reversal? I was my mom's mom in a previous life and she was the daughter. I have had my own past life experiences where my daughter was my sister, so we've definitely done this before. And you see, but it's interesting when we feel victimized by the certain relationships that we have in our life too, to see the way that we've done this dance before and perhaps been the perpetrator to them, and the way that karma has to work its way out that way and how we choose to do this play.
Yeah, I always say I have really shifted my mindset to things that are happening for me and not to me. And that small shift in mindset has been eye-opening for me.
Absolutely.
Because it really fosters curiosity. Okay, well, if this is happening for me, what am I supposed to be learning? Because like Oprah says, you'll get a whisper, then someone will tell you, and eventually they're going to hit you with a 2x4. So I definitely want to avoid the 2x4 hitting.
I feel that. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's really exciting.
Sarah, I don't know if this would, I guess, be dependent on your belief system or maybe Dolores Cannon's, but just like the linearity of time and how that's somewhat of an illusion to some. Like I personally adopt the Einstein time, like that it's a projection of the conscious perceiver. So, I'm really curious about, your take on time and just like linearity in general and how that applies to the hypnosis sessions that you facilitate.
I mean, I think that's a great question. For the human mind, it seems to be helpful to perceive time in that linear fashion, but in my own personal and through the work that I have done, I mean, all time kind of is happening simultaneously and is now. We've had parallel lives that I've led people through where you're like, okay, this is kind of happening at a timeline that seems to be an offshoot of this one. So, I mean, future lives, past lives, current life, it all seems to be happening now. It's just difficult for us to perceive it because of where we are in our human brains.
Yeah, I love that. That really speaks to the inherent like oneness of everything. I had one instance where I asked how many times I died in a hypnotic state, and I saw all death and decay, like buildings falling. It wasn't just humans. So I'm curious on that front. I don't know a lot about Dolores Cannon or, really this modality. Is there that like common thread that we all have access to the same memories if you go deep enough, or does it seem that there is just really distinctions based on soul journey? I guess I'm wondering like how separate are our experiences?
Well, I mean, just you get on TikTok and you're like, I've never had a unique experience in my life because everyone's like sharing the stuff that they've done. But I think that we do have our own personal mythology. And then, the subconscious mind is kind of the gateway to the higher self, which is kind of a gateway to the collective unconscious, the pool where we do all share these experiences together. So it just depends. You never know what you're going to hit upon when you get in there. But there are certain, like the archetypes that Carl Jung talks about, these things that are universally true kind of for all of us. And they come from that collective where we all kind of share and are part of that original source. So
that's amazing. I just like, ooh, I love that distinction of like, yeah, we have this shared collective experience and, we do have that process of individuation. So
absolutely.
Thank you for speaking to that. That clicked a few things in place. Thank you.
I love your questions. Thank you. They were really thoughtful. I appreciate that.
Well, I have to say, like, this is the magic that I had envisioned. And I just think it's so exciting to have a safe place to just talk about these things and compare notes and ask questions, because I think sometimes the energy realm can be confusing. And also with all the terminology, sometimes you don't want to be the person who will be like, how does that fit in? So I think that these conversations are helpful for me and hopefully for all of you.
Absolutely. Thank you for creating this space for us to do that. It's so appreciated.
Well, I was called to do so. I was leaving myself. I was leaving Mount Shasta, and I was told clear as day is bring the mystics together. And I'm like, what? Like, how am I going to bring the mystics together? Like, that was exactly what was told to me. I was like, I think you got the wrong gal. I don't think it's me. And here we are. I mean, that happened in March, a year ago, March, when I pulled away from Mount Shasta. And I really didn't know what that meant. But when I started to put this together, it happened very quickly.
Awesome. That's incredible.
Yeah. And Sherry and I, we were both in tech, and I'm like, these people are going to think I fell off like the rocker and hit my head 6 times. Like when I start talking about, okay, we're going to have this community, we're going to talk about energy practices. And I was kind of expecting everyone that I know to be like, unsubscribe, which hasn't been the case. Not everyone's joined, but they're watching, which I think is pretty exciting.
Hey, they got to get one little pinky toe in at a time, and I always look at it. I mean, people, you get so steeped in kind of energy work and the different ideas that once you're in this kind of realm for a little while, when you come up for air or when you go into other circles, you're like, oh, I forgot. Like this actually sounds crazy to some people. I forgot that, we're not Nas anymore. So I know what I know from experience, not because anybody told me or, so it probably does sound real crazy, but
You know what I think is interesting is today I got an email from Southwest Airlines because I get their newsletters, and they're hosting a forgiving ceremony, and they talked about the Reiki masters that will be there and the yoga that people can experience. I was like, major corporation focusing, doing something like this. I was like, whoa, we have, it's just amazing because when I started this, everything was woo woo, and you hardly even said anything out loud because somebody might think you're so weird that, they won't want to talk to you. Mm-hmm. Now it's Southwest Airlines is hosting a forgiving ceremony.
Good. We're trying to hit that critical mass of that tipping point. Especially now, it can be difficult with everything that's going on in the world. People become frustrated. And to me, it helped me like, okay, I can't do anything on a global scale, but what I can do is touch people on an individual basis and help us get ourselves right so that when we go back out into the world, we're this more whole, high vibe, and then it just kind of like, it just spreads that way. So to me, that was
I guess it's a personal experience, but I literally know nothing about Atlantis other than like what I've watched on YouTube, and that's only recently, but I just have like this, and it was a couple of years ago for an ongoing period of time. I felt like I had these like memory vision daydream things of me and like someone else standing on like I don't know, and it just on like a cliff overlooking, and it just felt like, and in my mind I was like, oh, you're like in Atlantis, you're like a I don't know, a priestess or something. And then I just never really told anyone that ever. It's because it sounds so crazy. But yeah, so then that kind of made me curious on learning about things like that. But there's really not a lot of concrete information. So
yeah, I mean, there really isn't. So trance experience can be one of the ways that we go back and are able to retrieve some of that. Atlantis is definitely
I mean, I don't know what it is, but it could have just been a past life in general that I'm like thinking of.
You will get little blips that'll come up, and you just got to trust it and kind of go with it. And learning to trust yourself and the information that's revealed to you without analyzing it, without disregarding it, is very difficult. It can be a challenge for people, to really trust themselves. Because I mean, I'll even have clients will have gone through this whole intense experience. They will have gone from crying to doing the whole range of emotion, and they're like, I just made all that up. I'm like, like, why would you make that up? Like, I don't think you did. It can be hard to convince ourselves of our own experiences even. So I think learning to trust the material that's revealed to you is a big part of it.
I think when I was just first learning to listen to my intuition, I gave myself this rule. I don't necessarily follow it now, but if I hear something 3 times, I'm like, okay, they're trying to get my attention. I need to do something with this information. And sometimes I get my son clairaudient, clairsentient, etc. And sometimes I hear that and I think, oh no, I'm not going to say that to them. And then I hear it again. And then I hear, I've actually felt like a tug. You better tell them because I'm going to keep bugging you till you tell them. But, yeah, you will hear that voice. And I think, Ivy, as you go on, you'll start to learn to listen to that voice that you hear in your head and trust it.
Absolutely. And I think the 3, getting that multiple until you really are trusting it, kind of getting 3 of something in a row is a good way. Like, okay, the first time's a coincidence. The second time, all right. The third time, confirmation, Yeah. And it can be something like I go for walks, spend a lot of time in nature. I get a lot of like animal spirit messages, and so I'm walking the beach the other day. I've never saw a crawfish in the lake ever. And I walk this beach all the time. But there I saw one and it's kind of like struggling at the very end. I'm like, that's interesting. I've never seen that before. And then I'm walking back on the beach and I find some like really purple crayfish claws. And I'm like, I am an avid beachcomber. I've never seen that in my life. So I'm like, interesting. I'm a crow brain. I'll pick it up and put it in the seashell that I was carrying with me. And I'm tootling along the beach. And then I find like two that are like really deep purple. And I'm like, I have walked this beach 100 times and I have never seen this before. I'm like, I don't know. So that, you know, it speaks to that three, that confirmation. And then I look up like, well, what does this crayfish mean? You know, like, what am I, you know, and then I was like, oh, okay. In the context of what was going on in my life, you're like, yeah, regeneration, the psyche, the subconscious.
I just wanted to mention that I just so deeply appreciate everyone's like discourse on like fully leaning into this, like all of you mentioning that. I stumbled here by just connecting with JJ on LinkedIn, and I mean, I've always been a very multidimensional, but you know, and like I love logic and rationale and using my mind, and I'm at the point where I'm like, I can't deny this any longer. And I also I can no longer conform to, you know, appeal to systems of oppression. And I have to completely unearth myself in order to deliver what you were talking about, Sarah, is just that the love. It's so simple. And my last organization, I was working for a celebrity, and it felt like, you know, what that represented in the external world was like a really big peak in my career. Like, okay, I'm in this like network of these people who make giant decisions about food globally. And I'm like, wow, okay, you know, being like a light worker and a way shower, and like I can make an impact here. I inevitably got ejected. But you know what that taught me is that like that was nowhere near the height of my power. You know, that was so much work needs to be done in those systems, but we can't do the work while we are earthed by them. And, you know, completely just, we have to claim our sovereignty in order to do that. And that does look like validating our experiences, despite how woo-woo they might seem. And something that came up for me while you were talking, and like Ivy while you were talking, I love the quote by Carl Jung. It's on all of my documents. It's from his early childhood reflections. They says inner experiences, they were the fiery magma out of which the stone that had to be worked was crystallized. And I just love that because, you know, Jung is so incredible because he validates so much so our inner experiences. And, you know, that like we do have inner lives, we have inner worlds. And then, you know, we're here in this 3D to make something physical out of that inner world. So I'm just so grateful to like have stumbled into this and connect with all of you, just brilliant human beings who are leaning in. And I just wanted to share this overwhelming love that I was feeling for you all, like sharing your stories and your wisdom so authentically.
Oh, thank you. I think it's wonderful. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I don't feel as alone with this community. I really do look forward to these calls. And I was telling Sarah, like whether 1 or 21 join, it doesn't matter. It's not about a volume. It's about a frequency. And I know when I leave this call, I feel seen. I feel like awakened, and I feel grounded.
Well, and I mean, going through this, JJ, you found me at a point where I think the day that you called me, I was very upset because, you know, when you go through this process, there's a lot of shedding that happens sometimes. Not everybody is meant to go with you on your journey. You'll lose friends, you'll lose family members. And I was like going through all of these like huge losses as I perceived them, you know, and then JJ just kind of contacts me out of the blue and she's like, oh, I'm doing this like thing with these other women. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I was like spiraling over nothing. That's okay. Here was my answer. It seems like they always push me to the point where I'm like, what do you want? And then they're like, here's the solution. It just came right to you. So like JJ found me at the perfect time. And I love it.
Well, Ivy, I wouldn't have found her had I not read that book on the hypnosis of the Atlantis journey, I think it is. And I wouldn't have, because getting down to Florida is not easy. I have kids and it's not easy. So I started looking up QHHT and I found Sarah, and then I found Michelle too, who's also Medina. And it's just wonderful. But I do think we should probably have a discussion on the shedding, because it can be traumatic to lose people that you think have been with you for decades, because the same things happened to me over the last few years. And it's a lot. It's a lot. But I do believe, going back to it's happening for me, it has created space for different types of energy.
Absolutely. I think you're so right about that. Learning to trust that process too.
Yeah. Still not easy though, to the ego and the human soul. That's for sure. That's for sure. And I just want to comment a second on the person who goes through the whole activity and says, I made that up. Like, what comes to me right away is like, that's that ego jumping in and protecting and saying no, that did not happen. Almost like deflating or devaluing the experience, because the soul has more power, but the ego often tricks it to believe it does not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's just such an interesting thing that, so I record the whole session and I make a YouTube video for you and I post it to YouTube. It's unlisted, so it's private. Only those that have the link can listen to it. And if you listen, you can hear the tone of voice change. You can hear little different micro expressions in there where you're like, I hope when you listen to it, you'll know that you weren't making it up. Like you'll be able to hear in your voice that, there was a shift that happened. And I wish I would do like real video, because sometimes like the looks on faces that happen, just their whole demeanor can shift depending on, who we're talking to. When we get into the idea of spirit attachments and stuff like that, when those things kind of come through, that's always a very interesting thing. One of my very first sessions ever, QHHT didn't really prepare me for it because spirit attachment isn't really in their wheelhouse. But fortunately, I had read about it enough that I was like, oh, I think that's what's happening here, because I knew my best friend for 16 years. Like I knew her life story, and there was just something different about this thing that I was talking to. And I'm like, I just knew. I was like, okay, this is not her anymore. You can hear the tone of voice shift. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's so interesting.
It's so interesting. And I think another session we probably should have in the future is, as a practitioner, like you cannot hold on to other people's experiences, of being able to hold space and create an experience, but allowing them to do with it what they may.
You do got to keep your spiritual hygiene up. It's in the beginning, it was really difficult because these are very high energy situations that we're in, and you have to have the bandwidth yourself to be able to hold space for both of you during a session. Now it's easier. We're used to working in that state. But some things still kind of happen. Days before a session will happen, I'm already picking up on things that like might happen in there. Things are occurring to me that I'm like, what is that coming from? And then I'll talk to them and I'm like, oh, okay. We were already starting to pick up on some of your things. I had a session recently, and I'm finding that I had a series of sessions where we were having a difficult time getting into a past life, but the higher self came through like, no problem, ready to answer the questions, bam. And so I'm like, well, why were we having a difficult time with the past life, And they're like, she didn't need to see it. There's nothing that she needs to heal from. And having seen that information would kind of derail them, So they're like, not always is it necessary to see that information, even if you think you want to, which is why I say curiosity isn't always enough. You can be curious, but it can be counterintuitive to the things that you need to do. But so in a session, I'll have the higher self scan your body, both the physical, the energy body, the energy centers, looking for anything out of balance or harmony, seeing if there are any entity attachments. And usually if they've got a really great connection, not only will I get their questions asked, but I'll ask them, do you have a message for humanity? because I don't like to waste that opportunity. If they've got a great connection, I want to say, what advice do they have for us as a collective so that we can continue, to shift these things? And they'll always have something really lovely to say. But she recently, and then I'm like, well, hey, is there any advice you have for me as I continue on this? Because I'm always looking to support my clients better. And they're like, they scanned me and they were like, you have an entity attack. And this is a woman that had like never talked about any of these things, But she reaches over and like grabs my hand and I start shaking. I feel it move all the way through me. We shake. She starts shaking. And then she just like lets it go. I was like, you never know what's going to happen. That was the first time that had ever happened. But thankfully, she was there having my back in terms of like that spiritual hygiene. Sometimes you pick stuff up along the way. When you're a sensitive person, these entities can sometimes see you and they're like, okay, yep, this one will do, because she will somehow get me to that next stage. So
Sarah, I had a question surrounding that. So part of why I'm here is because, I've had a lifetime of wild experiences. But lately they've been happening more like just in a really conscious, healthy, integrated way. Mm-hmm. That said, I am like not in a non-hypnotic state, but in a flow state. I found myself sometimes spontaneously channeling. And it happened last week when I was around a bunch of energy workers. I helped massage students learn how to massage by donating my body. And
tough job.
I just started channeling, and I had never heard this until you just talking about it, but they told me my entire face changed. I didn't even look like myself.
Yes.
And like, I heard that I was awake enough to hear my voice was different, but to hear my face didn't even look the same was shocking. So I'm hearing you saying that. I'm curious as someone who's having this happen to me. And I expect it to happen more frequently. Of course, I want to be able to like contain it and make sure consent of people, but also like, what did you call this? Because I feel like was it entity attachment?
Yeah, entity attachment. So any kind of discarnate spirits, either human or non-human, dark force energies, they have different, depending on their classification of what they are, it's a whole topic in itself. But
does it ever have like, I noticed that this has happened several times and it's the same, it feels like the same entity. Is there ever like,
ask it. I would get a name. I would ask it its name 3 times. Again, that number 3 is always really important. Whenever you check in with yourself, you're going to, I would ask it its name. I would make sure who you're talking to, and I would maybe even go as far as to ask it its allegiance, whether it's aligned with like light and source or whether it's a dark force entity, because when you start channeling stuff, it can get interesting. And you want to be careful what you are, even when you are in the presence of other light workers and stuff like that. You always want to be cautious.
I'd be curious about Sarah. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I really think, Kiki, you might want to look into Sarah Landon, because Sarah Landon, she's out of Washington State, but she's like you, started channeling, and she didn't know what the heck was going on, and she has now moved to the point where she is helping people understand that. And she's got I think it's a 3-day master class for free for people to learn more about what that's all about. And if you want, I can post that on the site so you can check her out.
Yeah,
I would love that. And Sarah, to remain on topic, I'm curious, just knowing this about me, do you think that, like, so I was diagnosed with autism, which is basically the extremist form of high sensitivity possible in a body. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Knowing this about me, do you think that it would maybe be likely that this would emerge if I did a like past life hypnotic session? Like, I'm curious to do it, but I also I want to set both myself up and a facilitator for success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if it seems to be that, I don't see why you would have any problem in session. channeling that if you want. Usually I will go through a stage where we add protection in. We call in our cosmic and soul family, our guides and angels, anyone that you work with. And there's protective measures we'll take kind of beforehand. So.
Okay. I like that you have all of like this awareness and you create that container where, that's okay. So that's really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all the women that came together. You asked such great questions, and I feel like so many of us are even more enlightened than when we started. So I am truly honored for creating this space for all of us. I continue to welcome the love and light here. As we close the session, we're closing the connection, but I look forward to seeing you again at togetherweseek.online.
Thank you so much, JJ. I appreciate you having me today. And thank you, ladies, for showing up.